I've discovered there was a Jacobite exile, I think it was called James Keith, who founded the first Freemasonic lodges in St. Petersburg and Moscow in Russia, who was high initiate from Scottish Freemasonry, and that then seeded all the Masonic lodges of Russia that later everybody joined, Novikov and Tolstoy and all the others. My friend Gary Lachman has recently published a book on esoteric Russia. He doesn't go into the Masonic stuff, maybe he doesn't know about it. And what most people neglect is this, what I can call this left-wing esotericism, associated with democracy, republicanism, and indeed communism, that vision of progressive humanity and unity. So that's a whole forgotten history that's very interesting. After World War II, unfortunately, the Cold War warriors like McCarthy and people in America who hauled Harlow Shapley up before the Committee on Un-American Activities, whatever that means. Are you a communist? Nonsense. They were contending with the sort of canard that all communists are evil, all Marxists are evil. And it was very tied in with anti-Semitism, because Marx being Jewish, they thought the whole thing was a conspiracy of the Jews. And so they were actually adopting the thought world that they just defeated. They just defeated the Nazis who thought like that. That's why they hated Jews and they hated Freemasons. The two things they hated most in the world. Well, the Americans had defeated them, but then they started adopting their thought world. And with Operation Paperclip, they brought over people that literally were thinking, along those lines. And I've discovered Harlow Shapley, who was a great man, who, by the way, Harlow brought over many Jews fleeing from Hitler's Germany, gave them jobs at Harvard, and helped these fleeing Jewish intellectuals to set up a new life in America, and was, heartbroken at what the Nazis were doing. Yet after the war, the Americans reversed that policy and started importing Nazi doctors and scientists for their own military programs. And they brought over a medical doctor, with a strange name, I've got it written down somewhere, who founded space medicine in America for NASA, who had been working in the camps, in the concentration camps, designing tests and experiments on prisoners that involved killing them gruesomely, subjecting them to all kinds of gruesome tests in the name of science. And he was, I think, the chief medical officer for the Luftwaffe as well. And he ends up working for the American government on their space program, and he's regarded as the founder of space medicine by the American NASA establishment. He was an ex-Nazi and a very, very dodgy one. Well, Harlow Shapley, spoke out against him. But Senator McCarthy, he hauled up Harlow Shapley to the Committee on Un-American Behaviour, but not the space medicine doctor. So being an ex-Nazi became acceptable in certain circles in America, but being prepared to talk to communists, oh my God, evil Jewish people, that became unacceptable. So how did that happen, that flip? That's what I'm interested in studying as a scholar. This is my period for my PhD, the Cold War, right? And I'm looking at it from a transpersonal history perspective. At what point did America ever think that it was acceptable to have ex-Nazi, murderous doctors coming and working for your military and hounding out, accusations of un-American behaviour of great cosmologists who were running Harvard University Observatory, who discovered the galactic centre was in Sagittarius, which is what Harlow did. I mean, we need to go that far back, people, to really unpick what has happened with Trumpism. Because Trumpism, white racism, we rule the world, we're taking it back, and you blacks can just, knuckle down and we'll kneel on your neck. That grew out of that flip and that reversal, that tragedy of what's happened to the American soul. I keep saying American, I mean the USA soul, because I'm a Canadian, I'm an American. I'm in Amerigo de Vespucci, a great Florentine who gave his name to the continent as a whole. Anyone from the continent is American. these people deserve a new name, I don't know, USAians or something. So it's a problem, and it's to do with, you see, as Chomsky and other intellectuals are saying, it's to do with the structural violence endemic in capitalism, in the American dream. Watch Michael Moore's film, Capitalism, if you don't understand what I'm talking about. You know, it's a real primer in what's been going on. What Marx himself didn't realise, and I'm sure if he were alive today he'd be kicking himself, he would write another volume of Capital, is he never realised the huge link between capital's interests and the military-industrial complex of which transcends nation. So the kind of people that invent new generation weapons in any era, the bow and arrow, gunpowder, you know, etc., the machine gun, they're the guys that end up owning the capital of that era. That's the iron law of history. That Marx, he kind of points to it because he says the guys that are owning the capital are the ones that are able to dominate labour and own the fruits of labour. He kind of worked that out. What he didn't work out is it's the guys with the biggest clubs, the sharpest stones, the strongest arrows, the biggest guns that own up dominating labour and therefore dominating capital. So there's a whole missing bit in Marx, which, I mean, the poor guy, you know, he worked non-stop, he was tireless work, and he couldn't think that one through for various reasons. But now, here we are, it's a long time since he published Das Kapital, we can work that through, and I'm putting the missing bits in my commentary, which is, you know, I'm saying where the good bits are, but I'm explaining why he left out what he left out. So that's, and I've discovered something absolutely very interesting that I kind of want to end with, which is an interview with Marx. You see, one of the best Marxist scholars of our day is a man called Robin Blackburn, who's professor of sociology at the University of Essex, who's done a lot of really interesting digging away in the archives. He's written a very interesting book called Karl Marx and Abraham Lincoln, An Unfinished Revolution, which I didn't really know about till I started doing the research. I mean, it's not in the public knowledge, this, that Marx had actually written to Lincoln officially on behalf of the International, of which he was the coordinator in London at that time, or, you know, one of the coordinators. And he was mandated by the International Working Men's Association, which he'd set up, because he was not only a theorist, he was an activist, he was creating networking and so on. And they tried to get this group of working men from all nations together, and women obviously, to discuss common policies, common problems, helping each other, you know, claw back some of the power from capital. And that was in the 1850s, 60s. And he was mandated to write to President Lincoln. And this text is given in Robin Blackburn's excellent book. I'm going to quote, "To Abraham Lincoln, President of the USA, Sir, we congratulate the American people upon your re-election by a large majority." This, by the way, is 1865. "If resistance to the slave power was the reserved watchword of your first election, the triumphant war cry of your re-election is death to slavery. From the commencement of the titanic American strife, the working men of Europe felt instinctively that the star-spangled banner carried the destiny of their class." And he goes on. And then Lincoln writes back through his ambassador in London, "Sir, I am directed to inform you that the address of the Central Council of your Association of Workmen, which was duly transmitted through this legation to the President of the US, has been received by him. So far as the sentiments expressed by it are personal, they are accepted by him with a sincere and anxious desire that he may be able to prove himself not unworthy of the confidence which has been recently extended to him by his fellow citizens and by so many of the friends of humanity and progress throughout the world, etc. And now, there's another thing in this book which is fascinating, and I want to end with that, really, which is Robin puts at the very end an interview with Karl Marx. And this is very rare. It's not often that historians find interviews. I once, in my book, which I wrote about the esoteric origins of Marxism, I tracked down an interview with his, a sort of domestic aide, who was interviewed much later after his death by a New York journalist. And she said that he'd actually, contrary to all the kind of criticisms of Marx as an atheist, had actually been a very pious man and had prayed and had gone up to his upstairs office and lit candles and done prayers of an evening. So she, very interestingly, was swearing that he was a private believer. Now that's fascinating testimony which I put forward. This interview by R. Landor is someone that goes to see Marx, and I'm going to read quotes from it because it's fascinating. "You asked me to find out something about the International Association, and I've tried to do so. The enterprise is a difficult one just now. London is indisputably the headquarters of the association, but the English people have got a scare and smell international in everything, as King James smelled gunpowder after the famous plot. The consciousness of the society is naturally increased with the suspiciousness of the public, and if those who guide it have a secret to keep, they are of the stamp of men who keep a secret well. I have called on two of their leading members, have talked with one freely, and I give you here the substance of my conversation. I have satisfied myself of one thing, that it is a society of genuine workmen, and that these workmen are directed by social and political theories of another class." And he goes on, and he says, "And then I came to see Dr. Karl Marx, who is their leading intellectual. Dr. Karl Marx is a German doctor of philosophy, with a German breadth of knowledge derived both from observation of the living world and from books. I should conclude he's never been a worker in the ordinary sense of the term. His surroundings and appearance are those of a well-to-do man of the middle class. The drawing room into which I was ushered on the night of the interview would have formed very comfortable quarters for a thriving stockbroker who made his competence and was now beginning to make his fortune. It was comfort personified, the apartment of a man of taste and of easy means, but with nothing in it peculiarly characteristic of its owner. A fine album of Rhine views on the table, however, gave a clue to his nationality. German, obviously. I peered cautiously into the vase on the side table for a bomb. I sniffed for petroleum, but the smell was the smell of roses. I crept stealthily back to my seat and moodily awaited the worst." There's a certain humour in this interview, which is why I think it's so fascinating. "He has entered and greeted me cordially, and we are sitting face to face. Yes, I am tete-a-tete with the revolution incarnate, with the real founder and guiding spirit of the International Society, with the author of the address in which capital was told that if it warred on labour it must expect to have its house burned down about its ears. In a word, with the apologist for the Commune of Paris. Do you remember the bust of Socrates, the man who died rather than protest his belief in the gods of the time? The man with the fine sweep of profile for the forehead running meanly at the end into a little snub curled up feature, like a bisected pothook that formed the nose? Take this bust in your mind's eye, colour the beard black, dashing it here and there with puffs of grey, Clap the head thus made on a portly body of the middle height, and the doctor is before you. Throw a veil over the upper part of the face, and you might well be in the company of a born vestryman. Reveal the essential feature, the immense brow, and you know at once you have to deal with the most formidable of all composite individual forces. A dreamer who thinks, a thinker who dreams. I went straight to my business. The world, I said, seemed to be in the dark about the International, hating it very much, but not able to say clearly what thing it hated. Some, who have professed to have peered further into the gloom than their neighbours, declared that they had made out a sort of Janus figure, with a fair, honest workman's smile on one of its faces, and on the other a murderous conspirator's scowl. Would he light up the mystery in which this theory dwelt? The professor laughed, chuckled a little, I fancied, at the thought that we were so frightened of him. There is no mystery to clear up, dear sir, he began, in a very polished form of the Hans Breitmann dialect, except perhaps the mystery of human stupidity in those who perpetually ignore the fact that our association is a public one, and that the fullest reports of the proceedings are published for all who care to read them. You may buy our rules for a penny, and a shilling laid out in pamphlets will teach you almost as much about it as we know ourselves. Now, by the way, that's the Communist Manifesto he's talking about, and other documentation which he'd written. I mean, that is why it's such an important document. I put it in this book of peace declarations. Then the conversation continues. Almost, yes, perhaps, says the interviewer, but will not the something I shall not know constitute the all-important reservation? To be quite frank with you, and to put the case as it strikes an outside observer, this general claim of depreciation of you must mean something more than the ignorant ill will of the multitude. And it is still pertinent to ask, even after what you've told me, what is the International Society? Dr. Marx, you've only to look at the individuals of which it is composed. Workmen. Yes, said the interviewer, but the soldier need be no exponent of the statecraft that sets him in motion. I know some of your members, and I believe that they are not of the stuff on which conspirators are made. Besides, a secret shared by 1,000,000 men would be no secret at all. But what if these were only the instruments in the hands of a bold, and I hope you'll forgive me for adding, a not over-scrupulous conclave? Well, there's nothing to prove it. The interviewer, the last Paris insurrection, the Commune? Dr. Marx, I demand firstly the proof that there was any plot at all, that anything happened that was not a legitimate effect of the circumstances of the moment. Or, the plot granted, I demand proofs of the participation in it of the International Association. The interviewer, well, the presence in the communal body of so many members of the association. Dr. Marx, well, then it was a plot of the Freemasons too, for their share in the work as individuals was by no means a slight one. I should not be surprised indeed to find the Pope setting down the whole insurrection to their account. But try another explanation. The insurrection in Paris was made by the workmen of Paris. The ablest of the workmen must necessarily have been its leaders and administrators. But the ablest of the workmen happen also to be members of the International Association. Yet the association as such may be in no way responsible for their actions. I'm going to pause there. You read the whole thing. I mean, it's brilliant. I think that's very interesting because in my book on the esoteric origins of Marxism, I discuss specifically the relationship of Marx and Engels to Freemasonry, which was very important at the time as a kind of middle-class movement for liberal democracy in the end of the 17th century in Britain and Scotland particularly, and then in Europe, and it grew in the course of the 1700s throughout Europe, and by the 1800s it was pretty common in France, Germany. Goethe was a Freemason, lots of great intellectuals were, and I was surprised this was never taught in university level history. So that's why I did like a lengthy study of it as part of my academic research, which then just ended up as a couple of footnotes in my PhD. But this is very interesting because, you see, Marx immediately, he counters this, well, it's all a conspiracy, you communists. He says, well, so are the Freemasons then. Which is sort of proof for my argument that the communists were in some way modelled on the Freemasons and shared much of the similar thought world. Now, you see, and then he says, wittily, that, no doubt this is what the Pope is saying, that, it's all the Freemasons that are behind it. Well, the Pope, unfortunately, had excoriated Freemasonry. He'd made it a heresy, or some of the popes had done, because they didn't really understand it. They didn't, they were, it was part of their general, like anything that thinks differently, you call it a heresy and you persecute it. Unfortunately, the persecution of Freemasons by the Vatican had a really pernicious effect on history, because it led to their persecution by the Nazis. When they came to Paris, they rounded up the Freemasons in the name of papal ideology, actually. And I'm talking the kind of Catholic, fascist, extreme right types that were behind some of the aspects of the Nazi movement, certainly some of the aspects of the fascist movement in Italy and in Spain, who all shared one thing in common, which was that they hated the Jews and they hated the Freemasons. Go and study the books. And poor old Marx, he knows what's coming. He couldn't have foreseen the Holocaust. He couldn't have foreseen the horrendous anti-Semitic attacks on Marxism, which he thought was just a scientific theory. He thought he was just a sociologist of economics and capital and so on, and he was. The fact that he was Jewish was kind of irrelevant, because he found the Bible a bit of a chilling document, as most people do. He was a child of the Enlightenment. He was a rationalist. So it's interesting, isn't it? And what we find is the attacks on liberalism and on the left generally has come from fanatics of the far right that see everything that's Jewish, everything that's Masonic, everything that's Marxist as a sort of big evil conspiracy that has to be taken down with every trick in the book, which is why Hitler launched his mad invasion of the Soviet Union against all ethics and international law. I mean, he actually had a peace treaty with Stalin, which he broke on the 22nd of June, 1941, to then invade. Bonkers, and the reason he did it was because he just wanted to kill all the Jews. He thought the Jews are running the Soviet Union, we'll invade and we'll kill them all. And that's what they tried to do. They had gangs going round with vans gassing them, and mass slaughtering, and then shipping them off to Auschwitz or wherever. The guy was a psychopath. And those people that say, no, you didn't know about the Holocaust, David Irving types. Sorry, read the stuff. Go to Auschwitz, as I've been. Talk to the archivists there. Go to the museum in Israel. Go to the museum in Leicestershire in England, which is dedicated to the victims of the Holocaust, where I used to take school kids. Do some research, and it's 100% clear that Hitler knew and planned the whole thing because of his psychopathic anti-Semitism, which was bred, in his petty bourgeois, ignorant form of extremist Catholic sort of racism, inspired by the Haeckel's and the kind of Darwinist idea that the supreme people, lovely white, blonde, Aryan Germans are going to, inherit the planet, and all the Untermenschen are going to be slaughtered. No compassion in that view of history. No love. That's what we're judged on, folks. It's love. no Christ in that view of history. It's a false Christ. It's a fake Christ that's being peddled, sort of racist, elitist Christ. And no, that's not the Christ I know, who is the Christ of universal love and universal wisdom, and who had strong links to the ancient mystery traditions, the Hermetic mysteries and so on. I've spoken about that in former lectures, and which came from Africa, you know, the motherland of wisdom in many ways, the ancient tribal peoples of the planet that Jung also knew. Yeah, so anyway, there's a few insights, I hope, on the kind of resources we need to pull together. This is the kind of research I've been doing, and you'll find it in my 4th volume of the Little Book of Peace Declarations. Peace still is an aspiration. We have to grasp after it, and as Gandhi pointed out, we can only do that through truth. The peace worker is a truth cultivator, and that's why the very last declaration in my Book of Peace Declarations here, the 4th volume, is my duty of oath of veracity that I'm asking parliamentarians to have to say when they get into office around the planet, not just in the UK Parliament, but every Parliament, every Congress, every democratic chamber should take an oath of veracity. That means a duty not to lie, to tell the truth as they know it, as they understand it, but definitely not to consciously, deliberately lie and deceive. If they do that, they lose power. It's one of the ways, one of the strategies I've thought up as a philosopher to reclaim the planet for us, the people. We may differ on political views, we may differ on economic theory, differ on religions, and so on, but I think one thing we all have in common as human beings is that we really don't like being lied to. It's a horrible, feeling. It corrodes the trust and confidence you have in people. And it's why the Druids of old made truth-telling the absolute bedrock of our, lineages and traditions. A Dharma seer, a truth seer, is what a Druid actually is, and it's what Gandhi wanted to resurrect for the work of ahimsa. I'm trying to find out, actually, any Gandhian scholars can help me, if Gandhi ever went to Stonehenge, given we've got the Peace Festival coming up. I've got somebody dining in from India, I hope. And because Gandhi lived in London, he studied at the University of London Law, where I graduated, and he was a member of the Theosophical Society in London. He met Blavatsky, who knew a lot about the Druids. It will make a great little play or a little bit of research to discover Gandhi's day-out trip to Wiltshire and going to Stonehenge. I can just see him, sitting there meditating and thinking, they were interesting, these Druids. I, worked as education officer for the Gandhi Foundation for some years and have a large collection of Gandhian studies. I've not discovered that yet. Anyway, if anyone wants to research it for me, thank you. I'm going to finish with a poem now, as is my wont, because today is the last day I'll be speaking before the solstice event, and I'm hoping people will be reading poems. So if you want to share some poems at that event, just email me, and I'll find you a slot in the speaking order. So this is my little bardic bell. This poem is called Last Chance. Life's secret joys, they hide in places where few can find them. Over the hill, called virtue, craggy and steep to climb. The sign to it is long disused and fallen away. It can be night time when you're setting off. Again and again you have to set off, as if from the beginning. It is the soul's calling to do this. You will know each time when it's right to set off. Your mind will sound with a clear bell of silence and a clean conscience. You will be like a child in innocence and enthusiasm. You will have boundless energy to go on, even into the pitch darkness. You will see a light far ahead, away along in the darkness. You will know eventually that this light is within you, always setting off towards its own selfhood. If you persevere and learn to listen to the clear bell, you will come at last to a place called truth, where a clear light gathers, as it does just before night suddenly, the dark radiance of the air, shining with a final beauty. You must take this guidance seriously. You must always remember, life is not a joke. Keep setting off, knowing that always it's your last chance.